Hello, everyone, and wishing you a very, very warm welcome to today's webinar. My name is Kate Lannon, and I'm the Senior Legal Officer with the Secretariat of the WHO Framework Convention on Tobacco Control. And we are sending very warm greetings to you today from Geneva, where we are based. We're, of course, very pleased to be with you today to present this webinar on the celebrating the launch of the Article 17 Toolkit of the WHO FCTC. So my very happy role today is to moderate today's session. We have really a wonderful lineup of speakers ready for you today, and I'm sure that you and I will both learn a lot from today's session. So we would especially like to thank today's agencies that contributed to this work. And those agencies are, like us, are members of the United Nations Interagency Task Force for the Prevention and Control of Non-Communicable Diseases, or the UNIATF. So thank you very much to our fellow member agencies. But before we get started with today's formal session, please permit me a few just housekeeping matters so that we can all keep track of today's very interesting discussions. So first of all, please be aware that today's webinar will be interpreted into the 6 official UN languages, that is into Arabic, Chinese, English, French, Russian, and Spanish. And you will find at the bottom of the Zoom screen, of course, the interpretation button. You should click on it and select your preferred language, please, and the floor language will then be muted and you can listen in your preferred language. In addition, please use the Q&A, that is the question and answer function, also found at the bottom of the screen, in order to ask any of our panelists a question. And please feel free to send those questions while the speakers are presenting, and we'll do our best to make sure that we have enough time at the end of the session in order to respond to your particular concerns or inquiries. So without any further delay, welcome again to today's session. And I would like, first of all, to introduce our first speaker, who is Dr. Rafael Lenczuka, and he will provide for us an overview of the issue that we're looking at today concerning the Article 17 matters, and of course, the launch, the soft launch of the Article 17 toolkit. And he will highlight for us some very important elements of that toolkit. Dr. Lenczuka is an associate professor at McGill University, one of my alma maters, as it happens. And he was also the lead consultant in helping us prepare this important document. So without any further delay, please, Rafael, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Kate. I hope everyone can hear me here. It's really such a pleasure to be able to present today. It was also a pleasure to contribute to the development of this important toolkit. And I think it's important to start by situating this in the era of the NDGs. And I thought this quote captured the kind of underlying aim of Article 17 and the efforts that intergovernmental organizations and governments are taking, civil society organizations are taking to work with farmers to pursue alternatives to tobacco growing. And this statement is from the SDG 2030 agenda document, which notes that the aim is to build a better future for all people, including the millions who have been denied the chance to lead decent, dignified, and rewarding lives, and to achieve their full human potential. So that's the backdrop of this particular initiative. I wanted to begin also by setting the context of tobacco growing and hopefully informing an understanding of the significance of Article 17. So when we look at the landscape of tobacco growing, we can begin with by looking at where tobacco is grown. And we've seen a massive shift in the last few decades of where tobacco is grown. If we take, for an example, the increase in tobacco production in what we could call the global south, we've seen it double from 1980 to 2001, and that trend continues. And in addition to that, we see a parallel shift in the way that tobacco is grown to the point where most tobacco is now grown on plots of land less than 2 acres. So smallholder tobacco farming has become a significant dimension of this new landscape. And one piece of this puzzle is that tobacco has been seen for a number of decades by many governments as an important economic commodity, and has been positioned prominently in the development plans of particular countries, especially countries with strong agricultural production. So with that, we've seen this kind of positioning of tobacco leaf and tobacco growing in the mandates of economic sectors. So it's worth begging the question, are these desired benefits occurring? And what we see is that on the farm level, first, smallholder tobacco farming across different country contexts, across time, that tobacco farmers are not receiving the purported benefits that were initially intended. And we see that the profits are significantly low across country contexts. Even a country like Indonesia, where there are 2 growing seasons, so tobacco farmers have the benefit of having 2 seasons of production, we still see profits for households scarcely reaching the poverty line, and usually situated much below the poverty line. And this seems to be the case across country contexts, continental contexts. And so we might look at, well, why are these profits so low? So some of the features of the tobacco growing context that are worth considering is that the input costs for tobacco growing are significant. Tobacco is an incredibly expensive crop to grow in terms of the inputs, and as well as the labor requirements of the cultivation of tobacco. And what we see also as kind of a third feature of this environment, and I'll get into this a bit as the presentation continues, is that the smallholder tobacco farmers across the world scarcely receive fair pricing for the leaf, which enhances the precarity of the context of tobacco growing in various countries around the world. And so we might also look at this, the macroeconomic level of tobacco growing. So we see the narrative, particularly from the tobacco industry, that tobacco is an important economic commodity for governments in terms of revenue generation and foreign exchange. And for some countries, it's more so than others. But generally speaking, we see contributions to GDP of around 1% and hovering around that level. For some countries like Malawi and Zimbabwe, we see it is a bit higher in terms of maybe ranging from 10 to 15%. But still, we come across this idea and this narrative that tobacco contributes to the macroeconomics of countries, and there is reason to question that narrative. And so if farmers aren't benefiting and countries aren't benefiting, we might ask the question, who is benefiting? And it's not surprising that it's tobacco companies themselves, the large cigarette companies that tend to benefit from this supply chain. And even when tobacco consumption continues to decline, the profits of these tobacco companies to continue to increase. And that, I think, is also an indication of some of the structural injustices that exist along the supply chain and the precarity that tobacco farmers face in different countries around the world. And so again, as we chart this landscape, we can then ask, given this precarious economic context, why do tobacco farmers continue to grow tobacco, and why do governments continue to support tobacco as an economic commodity? If we look at farmers' decision making, we see extensive research again across various country contexts, and we see a common pattern. And this pattern indicates that smallholder tobacco farmers are attracted to tobacco because of the structured supply chain. we've reached a point now where, at least in the countries where the bulk of the research has been conducted, that smallholder tobacco farmers are generally in contractual relationships with leaf buying companies, upwards of about 70 to 90% of smallholder tobacco farmers. And what does this mean? Well, this means that they enter into these contracts in order to gain inputs and loans in order to grow tobacco. And it tends to be because they lack the capital to invest in other commodities. And so to have the access to capital through loans from these leaf buying companies provides that entry point into the agricultural production. We also see that there is this historical legacy when we look at government support for tobacco growing. Tobacco growing has extended for over 100 years through the colonial period. And so we see that tobacco as a commodity and the tobacco industry becomes embedded in the institutions in governments where tobacco is being grown. So this brings us to Article 17, which is an important article within the Framework Convention on Tobacco Control, and one that we're I think increasingly beginning to appreciate, both in terms of the understanding of the supply chain dynamics and the importance of controlling and reducing supply of tobacco, and then also the ways that tobacco growing impacts the demand reduction measures. So all of the other articles of the Framework Convention on Tobacco Control, excuse me, are impacted by the presence of companies along the tobacco supply chain in countries where tobacco is grown. So we have an important opportunity here to address and improve the livelihoods of the households that are currently growing tobacco, to also kind of pursue this new agenda of thinking about more comprehensively, how do we develop, for example, more sustainable and more economically viable food systems, more fair, more just supply chains for commodities that don't end up being in products that are meant to kill their end users. And so this has been an excellent opportunity to kind of think through what are the key dimensions that are required for governments as they pursue Article 17 of the Framework Convention on Tobacco Control. And this has culminated in the development of this toolkit, which is meant to foster the implementation of Article 17. So if I could break down the kind of key features of this toolkit, the aim is really to provide the necessary evidence base to support implementation of Article 17, to assess the situation of tobacco growing in the countries where tobacco is grown, to chart pathways to alternatives, including institutional change that is required to support alternatives, to provide guidance on how to disentangle tobacco interests from government agencies. And this is a key feature that threads through the toolkit and the features of FCTC implementation in its entirety, and to provide key indicators to monitor change over time. So as these initiatives kind of gain strength and momentum, the toolkit provides important indicators to measure this change over time. So the toolkit has 7 key tools. The report that precedes these 7 tools kind of provides the backdrop and supports that evidence base to engage in conversations across sectors, because we know that this is a whole of government, requires a whole of government approach to addressing Article 17. So the first tool is really to debunk some of the myths. And we know from conversations with people that are working in this space that many of these assertions, as we note them here, are common, and that they're powerful in sustaining this idea that tobacco is an important economic commodity. But I think what gives me hope, and what I think others are seeing, is that governments are starting to realize that tobacco is not a sustainable economic commodity, is not yielding the purported benefits that many have been putting forward over the years to kind of sustain this idea that tobacco should be that tobacco is actually supporting the livelihoods of smallholder farmers. So we are seeing this shift, and this first tool kind of provides snapshots of evidence to inform the conversations that, for example, health ministries can have with agricultural ministries or ministries of trade and industry. The second tool really provides guidance on identifying the factors that are so important to the implementation of Article 17. So in a sense, it's looking at who is doing what and what is needed to facilitate alternatives. And this includes information, other resources, and policy and program linkages. And the ultimate aim really for the second tool is to identify barriers and facilitators to implementation, and really to look at the actors and resources that can support implementation. So as you can see on this slide, and it's a bit small, so I'll just give a few examples. Under this tool of situational analysis, if we're looking at the government, what's happening within government, we might be guided by questions like, does the National Development Plan include tobacco? How is tobacco positioned in government priorities? How is tobacco production framed? Is it framed positively or negatively? And we've seen that this is an important feature where if tobacco is embedded in national development plans, it trickles down to shape ministerial mandates. And it's much harder if tobacco is positioned again as a prominent economic commodity to then shift away from tobacco. So looking at how tobacco is embedded in these more important plans is just one feature of that situational analysis. In terms of information, we might ask, are there any demand forecast data on food crops and other rural activities to support diversification in tobacco growing countries? Is there any standard information set for potential alternatives to tobacco growing in that country? The third tool then presents kind of key factors required to facilitate alternatives. And I think this toolkit is also situated in an era where we're really continuing to learn about what works and what doesn't. So this is really a starting point based on the efforts that have been made over the past decades to really find alternatives to tobacco growing and really kind of consolidate the kind of key patterns and initiatives and the successes. So in terms of, we know that farmers are attracted to the inputs and financial supports that the leaf buying companies provide through these contractual arrangements. So we know that the costs of inputs are particularly high for tobacco growing. We know that they certainly don't benefit from the interest that's provided on these loans, and then being stuck in this precarious position of having to pay back these loans at the end of the season, receiving poor prices for their leaf and struggling to pay off these loans. So there are important features of, for example, if we're looking at alternative crops to tobacco, that in such initiatives and supports that farmers have access to these inputs and financial supports to grow other things. But there's of course much more to this particular tool to look at these kind of key features. So I'll move on to the fourth tool. And this one really is a comprehensive look at what each sector of government can contribute to this initiative. Again, as I had mentioned, we know that this requires a whole of government approach, and we know that the sectors of government need to contribute equally to the pursuit of finding alternatives to tobacco growing. And so we can see examples here of where, for example, a Ministry of Trade and Investment might contribute. And there are various tools that can, within this fourth tool, that can help kind of guide governments, civil society, and other actors to engage with a more comprehensive intersectoral approach to the pursuit of alternatives. And a big piece of this is then looking at Article 5.2 and the complementary role that that plays in terms of having a national coordinating mechanism that has the various ministries and actors contributing to the same goal. On the fifth tool, we really wanted to articulate the intersection of Article 5.3 of the FCTC and Article 17. And tobacco growing countries have a unique institutional environment, and this is important to identify and be aware of. We see that, for example, tobacco boards are legitimate, credible institutions within tobacco growing countries. And on these boards, we see tobacco companies, leaf buying companies, and other supply chain actors, private sector actors sitting next to representatives from the Ministry of Agriculture and other ministries within government. So in a way, it institutionalizes this relationship between the tobacco industry and government, and there are various negative implications for having those kind of relationships institutionalized in these countries. And so this really kind of this tool outlines those relationships, points the governments in terms of where they can extract the tobacco industry from these types of institutions. And a big part of, and it's a broader initiative, is to repurpose these institutions that currently exist and currently operate efficiently and function well to the pursuit of other alternatives, whether they be crops or other aspects of an economic livelihood. So we can move on then to the sixth tool, which really kind of illustrates some of the ways that governments can attend to the needs of communities and support communities based on the strengths and the opportunities that currently exist. And part of this is looking at arrangements that exist. So it could be collective arrangements in terms of resource sharing or these types of things that can be identified and leveraged for the pursuit of alternatives. And that takes me to the last tool, and that is a list of 71 indicators along 5 categories. So indicators along in the categories of the household, the community, the environment, the supply chain, and then governance indicators. And I've kind of given 2 sets of examples for the categories of community and governance here. And this really just can aid governments in monitoring changes over time, as I had mentioned at the beginning of this presentation, not just in terms of what's happening at the farm level, but also what's happening in the institutional level. So with that, I want to thank all of you for attending, and I want to thank Calvin and everyone who's been involved in this initiative over the years. I was fortunate enough to come into a context where a lot of work had been done, and so I wanted to thank everyone for that. And I also wanted to just quickly thank the tobacco farmers who have offered their time to share their situation so that we have a sense of what their livelihoods look like and how we can support the implementation of Article 17 for the benefit of their livelihoods. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Raphael, for that excellent presentation, for first of all outlining for us very clearly the problem, and then giving us an overview of the 7 key tools that are contained in the toolkit that can help us to find solutions to that problem. So next, we will hear from our colleagues in the World Health Organization, who will share with us some very important insights from very important ongoing work they have on the ground in Africa, particularly in projects that are underway in Kenya and in Zambia. So our first speaker from WHO will be Dr. Vinayak Prasad. He's the head of the No Tobacco Unit at WHO. So Vinayak, may I ask you to take the floor, please?
Thank you, Kate, and good afternoon, good morning, colleagues. And thank you, Raphael, for setting the scene and also giving the big picture how the toolkit will be helpful. Because the way Article 17 work has progressed in different countries is lack of awareness, lack of knowledge, public perception, government perception, farmers' perception, all which are hindrances to moving forward in pushing the narrative. Now, we are seeing that while there are 80 odd countries that grow tobacco, there are about 35 of them that actually believe that tobacco growing is great for the economy, and therefore they don't do demand reduction measures. So they don't raise taxes on tobacco product, they don't do smoke-free laws. So they link supply and demand issues. But then there are exceptions. We have seen Brazil, we have seen India, we have seen recently Kenya, we have seen Uganda that have moved on. But then there are many others in both African and Asian settings that have not made progress just because of the belief and lack of knowledge and awareness. So it's very important and helpful that the toolkit is now going to help these countries unblock some of these misconceptions or even lack of knowledge. Now, having said that, we have seen a number of pilots in the area of alternative livelihoods in the last 20 years, since the time of the FCTC negotiation, in more than 15 countries. But these pilots have never been scaled up. These pilots are 50 farmers, 80 farmers, 100 farmers, 150 farmers, all demonstrating change of behavior or making more income. So what we decided as World Health Organization was to see whether we could look into some of the most recent challenges which the world is facing and leverage that. For example, food insecurity issues, food shortages for this year. So we did a World No Tobacco Day campaign this year on grow food, not tobacco. Then last year we did something which is a tobacco and the environment issues, because the environment is so much high on the political agenda. This has helped us bring together other UN agencies, and we'll hear more about it from my colleague Simone Sinclair, who will speak after me, and how we managed to get the other sectors to take leadership. And again, this is a very important issue to discuss. It cannot be a health-led, WHO-led, Ministry of Health-led initiative. These initiatives will only be pilots. If you have to scale up, we need the agriculture sector, we need the food sector, we need the development sector to take the leadership. And this is where we are trying to demonstrate that this is so important, that this is linked to climate safe agriculture, this is linked to environmental issues, this is linked to food security. We really need to shape the market. Once we shape the market, the farmer is very smart. He knows it's good for his health, he knows it's good for his economy, he knows it's good for the environment and the soil. And once we demonstrate that, we don't have to convince the farmer. So the numbers definitely need to be worked upon at country level. The advocacy elements are very important. Role of civil society is extremely important, and engagement with the government and the policy makers. But once the market mechanism are kicked in, we are seeing great progress. And so with these words, I will hand over to Simone Sinclair, my colleague, who will share with you our experience of trying to shape the market, looking at some of the innovative strategies of engagement, including microfinancing, including agriculture smart, all of those elements. In Kenya, where we've been running for more than 2 years now, and more than 6,000 farmers have registered this year. So we're trying to get at least 3,000 of them to successfully transition. We have already got 2,000. And then Zambia, which we recently introduced. And it's so important for Zambia because the entire tobacco control legislation is stuck. So we want to demonstrate the success in Zambia as a way forward to unblock similar countries to move forward on the tobacco control measures to reduce the demand. So thank you very much. Simone, it's over to you.
Thanks so much, Vinayak, for setting the scene, and good afternoon, everyone. I believe Kelvin will be sharing my slides in just a moment. Great, thanks so much, Kelvin. And good afternoon, all. It's my pleasure to present to you today the Tobacco Free Farms Initiative, which is a joint initiative of the UN, which aims to actualize the provisions of Articles 17 and 18 of the WHO Framework Convention on Tobacco Control. Next slide, please. So as Vinayak well mentioned, and well put into context, why it's so important to address supply side issues to effectively reduce the demand for tobacco. So you'll see here on the right-hand side of my slide, a graph from the WHO report on the global tobacco epidemic. And this is a report which monitors the implementation of 6 demand reduction measures that make up the Empower package, which is derived from some of the articles of the WHO FCTC. And like Vinayak mentioned, these are like raising taxes on tobacco products, making environment smoke-free, banning tobacco advertising, promotion, and sponsorship. And we know that more than 65% of the world's population is now covered by at least one of these comprehensive demand reduction measures, and the global tobacco use prevalence is on the decline. But we're not moving fast enough to meet our global targets. And one of the gaps in our approach is that we haven't made an accelerated effort to address the supply side issue of tobacco growing. Next slide, please. So as Vinayak mentioned, there are over 80 countries around the world that are growing tobacco. And one of the biggest challenges policy-wise is that the tobacco industry exaggerates the economic importance of tobacco farming and its contribution to employment, which doesn't make for a political environment that's very conducive to the effective implementation of demand reduction measures. You'll see here on the right-hand side of the screen, this is a banner on the back of a rickshaw in India. And really the tobacco industry is using tobacco farmers to lobby against tobacco control policies. And in reality, the tobacco farmers experience serious economic hardships, labor exploitation, environmental degradation, and health issues. Next slide, please. But beyond the health, economic, and environmental issues, it's really important to note that tobacco growing has a serious impact on food security and nutrition. This is an issue that we particularly see in Africa, as the tobacco industry is increasingly targeting countries on the continent for tobacco growing. I've put some stats here on the slide, but we see that over the last 2 decades, tobacco production globally has decreased by 15.8%, but in Africa, it's seen an increase by 19.8%, which is really why we've decided to focus on some of these tobacco growing countries in Africa for the start to this project, and focusing on freeing up fertile land that could be used to grow food, but instead used to grow tobacco. Next slide, please. So tobacco farmers are generally well aware of the health and environmental harms of tobacco growing because they experience this firsthand. But this year outlines some of the challenges in actually having tobacco farmers make that shift and make that leap of faith and starting to grow alternative crops. So we know that tobacco offers an assured market, and that generates small windfalls of cash, which is attractive to farmers when they have to make upfront payments for things like school fees. And especially because tobacco companies provide access to the inputs needed to grow tobacco, and this is done on credit. The challenge then comes when it's time to pay tobacco farmers for the crop. It's the tobacco companies themselves that are grading the leaves, pricing the leaves, and that leaves tobacco farmers with very little room for negotiation. And they end up earning very little at the end of the year, and oftentimes unable to pay back the debt that they had from the beginning of the year of taking these inputs on credit from the industry. And then, of course, they're dealing with having little to no food crops being grown on their land. They're dealing with all of the environmental, health, climate challenges that I mentioned earlier, as well as gender inequality issues and perpetuation of child labor. Next slide, please. So this brings me to describing our initiative, Tobacco Free Farms, which has been active since 2021 and is currently operational in Kenya and Zambia. And this is one of our farmers on here, this screen. Next slide, please. So the goal of this initiative is to address some of the key challenges that tobacco farmers are experiencing. And as Vinayak rightly outlined, We're really focused on taking a market shaping approach to ensure that farmers have several economically viable markets for the selected alternative crops. It's really important, since they have the assured market of tobacco, that they feel like they have an assured market in the alternative that they're shifting to. So this initiative also aims to build the knowledge amongst tobacco farmers about the challenges and build their capacity for actually making that shift to alternative crops. And we are measuring the success of this project by seeing how many more farmers we can get to shift away from tobacco growing. We want to see higher earnings for the farmers and their families, more acres of land being dedicated to climate safe, nutritious crops. And then, of course, a really key part of this is the local partnerships with private sector players, with government, to create an enabling and supportive crop production and marketing ecosystem. Next slide, please. This is another one of the partners on the ground who is examining one of the fields of high iron beans. Next slide, please. So really what I want to focus on here is the multi-sectoral approach that we've taken to this project. You see on screen the logos of various agencies that have been involved in bringing this project to life. The lead UN agencies are really the World Food Programme, the Food and Agriculture Organization, and WHO. But this work is done in strong collaboration with the Ministry of Health and Ministry of Agriculture, both at the national level and at the county and provincial level. They're really instrumental to the project and involved in a lot of the decision-making processes throughout. But first, I'll speak on the roles of the lead agencies. So WHO has the mandate on health, of course, and serves as the convening power for this initiative, with the mandate under the WHO FCTC. Then we have the Food and Agriculture Organization come in to support the mapping and identification of viable alternatives. They're building the capacity of field staff in the Department of Agriculture on good agricultural practices and training of farmers. And then, of course, they're really instrumental in gaining the political support for the initiative. Then we have World Food Programme, and they're really supporting market linkages and identification of off-takers for the selected alternatives. And what's interesting about this model is that they help us to identify public and private sector markets for off-taking the crop, but they actually backstop this project, which means that even if farmers are unable to sell to some of these markets we've identified, the World Food Programme has guaranteed to purchase from those farmers so that there's no gap in support for those farmers that make the shift. We've also recently brought on the UN Capital Development Fund to support the establishment of a microfinance mechanism and the UN Convention on Climate Change to explore climate and carbon credit opportunities. And then I have a few other logos on screen here of some of our private sector partners who have been really instrumental in the actual field implementation. Next slide, please. Here you see one of our lead farmers who's training other farmers on growing high iron beans. Next slide, please. So I'll give a quick overview of the model itself. This is a project that starts with the assessment of the market, like I mentioned. So we're looking at what private and public sector market players are looking to buy, where the demand is, and then making the selection of the alternatives and mapping that out with the Food and Agriculture Organization. Then we lead into community sensitization on the alternatives through field days, school demos, radio talk shows, everything to get the community aware of the alternative that's been selected. Then we shift to farmer recruitment and registration. This is done with the Ministry of Agriculture as well as farmer service centers, which is a term that's used for basically lead farmers who group together farmers. So they might cover 150 to 200 farmers under a single farmer service center. And this kind of grouping really allows for effective training, aggregation, and offtake of the alternatives. Then we are linking the farmers to certified input providers to make sure that they have really high quality seed, which will lead to higher yield and higher quality grain at the end of the season. We're training on financial literacy and giving access to packages on credit for input through microfinance institutes and VSLAs. There's trainings on good agricultural practices, training of seed bulkers. So seed bulkers are actually farmers who are just producing seed that is then sold back to the farmers. This is to try to avoid any issues on the input supply element of the value chain, to make sure our farmers are really getting access to quality seed, either within the project or outside of the project through some of our partners. Then we support post-harvest handling and aggregation support, so making sure that after the farmers grow their crops, that they're being supported to shift through the crops and bring them over to the farmer service centers where they're being aggregated for offtake, and then linking them to the off-takers. In this case, we've had a lot of success selling to schools, hospitals, prisons. There's a really high demand for the crop that we've identified so far for this project, which is the high iron bean. I'll get into that in just a minute, but also looking at different options for value addition in the future. So this might be looking at something like bringing peanuts and making it into peanut butter, or sunflower seed into sunflower oil. Then we're also doing a lot of data collection, so reviewing health records and tobacco-related illnesses that are collected by the Department of Health, and we'll monitor that over time as this project is implemented. And then finally assessing the economic impact of the shift from tobacco to the alternative, and looking at what challenges we experienced in that season and making small adjustments as we go along. So this is kind of a cyclical approach. Here you see some of the high iron beans that I mentioned. We are mostly focusing on this crop as the alternative in Kenya, but we're also exploring other climate safe, nutritious crops in Zambia, and we'll continue to introduce new alternatives as the project expands and as new market players come into the project. Next slide, please. Just sharing a bit here about the benefits to farmers. Of course, I mentioned the access to the market through the farmer service centers, access to the seeds and training to make sure that they have high yield. Also important to note that these crops that we're selecting are very short maturation period. For high iron beans, it's around 75 days on average, which means that compared to tobacco, where you spend 6 to 9 months in the field, taking care of your crop every single day, these high iron beans, which actually require very little labor, means that farmers have time to spend on other business ventures, and kids can be attending school because they're not needed in the fields for growing tobacco. The high iron bean is really interesting because it's a nutritious crop that can feed your family and sold at a really competitive price right now due to the demand. And in Kenya, especially, there's a high demand that's not quite being met by domestic production. So this is why this sort of project is interesting in building the capacity of local farmers to be growing the crops instead of importing. And then, of course, it leads to improved soil quality and the ability to grow other crops. It does nitrogen fixation, which means that you're less reliant on fertilizer. It replenishes the soil. And so essentially, these are good crops to be shifting from post-growing tobacco. And then, of course, we see improved health outcomes for farmer and family members, which is really important. Next slide, please. This is just one of our aggregation hubs. You see here, one of the field staff is preparing the hermetic bags for sale to the World Food Program, and those are our high iron beans being sifted through. Next slide, please. Just quickly, some of the achievements so far. Vinayak mentioned that we have over 2,000 farmers in Kenya that have shifted away from tobacco to high iron beans, with over 600 metric tons of beans sold and over 3,500 acres of land that have been cleared up and freed from tobacco to grow nutritious crops. We have 6,000 farmers registered for the next season. You see that these numbers increase when farmers see that their neighbors are having success with these alternatives, and that trust within the community is being built. And so really a lot of that scaling up is done very organically. And then, of course, in Zambia, we will start with the next season in December. The rains will come, and we're aiming to have at least 500 farmers in Zambia. So these are really great numbers so far. We're hoping to see this continue to grow. We're hoping to bring in new countries to the initiative, and really excited to be able to share this with you all today. So I'll stop now. I know we said that we'll do a Q&A session at the end. So I'm happy to answer any questions after that. Thank you.
Thank you very much to our WHO colleagues. Thank you, Vinayak and Simone, for a description of that really incredibly successful so far and promising for the future project. projects, I should say, that you have running in Africa. And I can attest to the fact that these high iron beans are not only delicious and nutritious, they're easy to cook as well. And it's really a wonderful output. So our next speaker this afternoon, we've already heard some mention of how important civil society is to these efforts. And our next speaker we're very pleased to present is Mr. Léonce Sessou, who is the Executive Secretary of the African Tobacco Control Alliance. Now, he will share with us today some information about tobacco farming in Africa and also about the support of civil society for the promotion of Article 17. Over to you, please, Léonce.
Thank you very much, Kate. Hi, everyone. I'm very pleased being here with you today to share with you on civil society role in the promotion of the Article 17 of the WHO FCTC. As you can see, at ATCA, the African Tobacco Control Alliance, we are celebrating this year our 15th anniversary, and starting this 15 years ago at COP8, supporting parties and promoting the WFCTC. Today we're talking about the Article 17, which is a key also, as all the provisions in the WFCTC is one with impact in community. We as a civil society organization, we strongly collaborate, not just at regional level, but also at country level with parties and other stakeholders. As you can see, the Alliance currently covers 39 countries in the WHO region, where we have 131 organizations that are members and acting as a network, but also coordinating civil society interventions in the countries and at regional level, but also leading the knowledge sharing or communication in terms of tobacco control and health promotion in the region. With some of those international accreditations that we have that also helping to stand, with our members, firm with the government and collaborate. The discussion today we are in is key, as it's for me, it's addressing what I would call, some community challenges. And when it comes to civil society, as you know, civil society interventions is to, are to promote the well-being of the population at large. And they play an important role as to address socio-economic, but also environmental issues. And this Article 17 is about this exactly. That's, of course, when we promote Article 17 in the countries, we are not just, as my predecessor they said, addressing the environmental challenges, but also, as they mentioned, we also been addressing the socio-economic challenges that is at whole. When we combine these, then we're talking about development. And the tobacco growing as challenges we can observe in the countries, deforestation, soil degradation, water contamination, food insecurity. I will elaborate more on that, and child labor. We also see how, in some cases, gender inequality, let's say as a whole, is a cycle of poverty. And from health side, we all know the green tobacco disease as well. And for us, as a civil society alliance and with our members in those 39 countries, I'm glad Simon and Dr. Vinayak, as they mentioned, and also the first presenter, we have this initiative starting with some countries already in Africa having impact, and this collaboratively with civil society. Civil society mission is, of course, well articulated in the WHO FCTC, in the preamble, and also as from the guiding principle, let's say Article 4.7. So it's clear that as having this from the principle, but also from the Article 4.7, civil society alongside the parties playing a key role to address these challenges. So for me, to first say that when we promote Article 17, we can really say that we are addressing these challenges, but we are reversing the cycle of poverty in the community. This is a key point to note, as it's not just health, but it's a comprehensive way to address the development issue as a community at community level. And you stressing on food security and nutrition. This is key when it comes to community based development. Everything starts there in the community, having a good food. And as you know, in our region in Africa, most of the food we have, in the capital city, is coming from the rural areas. That's another issue. So when we have this tobacco going, where the lands that should be used for food production is being used for that crop, you can see the impact as we having, not just in the community where this is happening, where tobacco is being grown, but there's an extension effect that is affecting, the entire country, that's entire population. And that's another key point, that food security as a basic thing that we need in the community to start promoting development. So one thing, as we all know, and Dr. Vinayat also mentioned this, this is tobacco is an intensive, labor demanding product, and it also take a long time, in the year. While this doesn't permit farmers to go into another crop or even to grow what they need to eat. This also raises concern, while we also have noticed all the impact on the environment. Based on this, I think we can say, of course, in Africa, we have the T5, we have countries that are among the top growing countries globally. Simon mentioned already these numbers there, that's, while it's, the cultivation decreased globally in Africa, we having an increase. And you can see in the table, there's some countries where in the WHO Afro region, we have tobacco being grown, and exported. This being addressed by the promotion of the Article 17. And from the experience that we have seen in the region, I really want to thank all partners and stakeholders, WHO and the UN agencies involved in this. This, as we can see, is a multi-sectorial approach that's being implemented. And I noticed three things here. One is that we have leadership in the government. We need it. We need it. They ratified the convention. They are having an issue on the population. This is a development issue, as I said, not just environment, not just health, it's also socio-economic. So it has becoming a key problem in the country, or affecting a region and globally. So having government leadership is key. And again, the support, from the international bodies, as we saw from the previous presentations, all the UN agencies supporting this. This is coming from a treaty. The convention is there backing up, and this is key. All this going now together with the community-based approach. This has embedded in the community, as Simon said, in Africa, the experiences in Kenya, in Zambia, are embedded in counties, at community level, so that it start there, but also engaging the local government, local actors, where civil society again will come in as part of this, the community to collaborate in this. So this is a multi-sectoral approach, and I think these are key success factors to the implementation of Article 17. And we need to keep on this as, going together, international commitment, having that leadership in government and cost-cutting leadership in government. Not just Ministry of Health, but Ministry of Agriculture involved, Ministry of Economy involved, Ministry of Commerce involved, and having this will be key. And specifically speaking to the tobacco-free farm initiative in Kenya, as you can see, they already elaborated on this from the intervention we have in at that level globally and government intervention, but specifically the civil society in Kenya through the Kenya Tobacco Control Alliance, is playing a key role in there in Kenya. The Kenya Tobacco Control Alliance is a membership alliance in Kenya where they have several organizations together collaborating in this initiative. You can see some pictures here, and on the field with the farmers here, we have all the actors involved in this initiative, which is really great. As civil society is there in the community with WHO, with the Ministry of Agriculture, with the Ministry of Health, with FAO, all of them supporting this. It is in the Migori County as a good initiative from civil society also involved in this, supporting this initiative by mobilizing the community. They can speak the language to the community, they know how to take in this, but also mobilizing efforts to support the knowledge and the training, capacity building in the farmers to translate knowledge to them easily. Civil society also in countering tobacco industry, as we all know, tobacco industry is, as this initiative started 2 years ago, has been playing around, even engaging in various activities, in tree planting and others. And you can see that civil society as well has a role to play in countering the tobacco industry, addressing tobacco industry narrative. Here we can see KETCA organizing a conference, the press conference, to address those an issue specifically when the government is embarking on signing an MOU for the exportation of tobacco leaves. This will not be rightly positioned when the government is promoting alternative livelihoods. Again, this campaign, on social media, supported by ATCA and the country partners, KETCA included, as from the World No Tobacco Day, we have all these materials and also promoting this to keep on to keep the narrative going on. Now, I want to highlight 5 benefits here. Benefits to the communities, and from the achievements that we have. One is that we can see that there is an improve in the living standard. When you can see from the pictures and also what we heard from Simon, this is clear, and from the assessment and the feedback that we got as civil society, we can feel it. From the farmers, they are feeling well, they are good, they have food for the family. Also, diversification is also coming slowly, and then this is key to reduce vulnerability in the communities where food security and nutrition is improved. As Kate said, that bean is really nutritious and is good for health. Environment, restoration is also be there. We know tobacco growing is really having it has a negative impact on the environment, and through this we can now regenerate the soil, but also use the land to produce food for the community and do regeneration of the soil and get what we can call a reforestation. The examples that we have in Kenya, as Dr. Vinayak mentioned, has been extended to, now we've seen growing attention or interest in this, and Zambia is now again as well embarked on this. You can see then that this is an inspiring example. And I really, as we are doing today, call us to keep promoting this. For us, as we saw from the World No Tobacco Day this year, and Dr. Adriana also, traveled there and supported this campaign. Let's keep it up and to ensure the sustainability. Get 4 things to mention here. First is we need to extend this, spectrum of civil society. We need to get more involved. We need to also extend this to other governments. As you can see on the table there, we have few other parties in the region where we have tobacco going on. So we need to extend this to other governments, other countries, to get other stakeholders involved. The collaboration at community level as well should also, it's important to reach more communities, as in Kenya, for example, starting with those counties, but also why not extend it to other community, and scaling up, all the successful interventions that we have in, and diversification in the crops. Lastly, as mentioned here, we know that the industry is working around this and to weaken the process. So we need to advocate to have strong policies that can support the implementation of this toolkit, that can support the entire implementation of Article 17. That's where civil society, again, we will be there to support this advocacy. Thank you very much, Kate. I'm ready to take some questions. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you so much, Léonce. It's a very, very interesting presentation on the work that ATCA has been undertaking in this space. And of course, again, re-emphasizing the importance of civil society and of taking a multi-sectoral approach to these very difficult issues. So our next speaker is from another UN agency. We have with us today Mr. Jorit Kaminga, who's from the UN Office on Drugs and Crime, or UNODC. And Jorit will be sharing us today the experience of UNODC's program in respect of alternative development. So please, Jorit, may I invite you to take the floor?
Yes, thank you very much for the invitation, and congratulations on the new toolkit. I think it's very useful. I worked for 8 months on a practical guide on alternative development and the environment. So it was also really interesting to see how you have approached the toolkit and the practical elements of it. And I was also happy to find quite some commonalities with our work, which takes place in the illicit economy. Right, so there's a lot of overlap. We have controlled substances, we have demand reduction, we have alternative crops, we have market forces. In our case, it's illegal actors and not legal tobacco companies that are also trying to maintain these patterns of production. So overall, I think there's a lot of things we have in common, and I think also there's a lot of things we can learn from each other while looking for these alternative livelihoods. Next slide, please. So what is alternative development? And I'm now talking about our alternative development. It's basically a policy instrument within the supply side of illicit drug control efforts. But it's also a process that tries to decrease the dependence of local communities on illicit crop cultivation. So what is alternative about it? The development interventions, and that's probably the case in your sector as well, the development interventions themselves are often not very different from other rural development policies and practices. But in our case, the context is really different. It's the setting in which we provide a specialized form of economic and social development support for local communities and territories that in one way or another face certain circumstances which have created or strengthened a dependence on illicit economies. Next slide, please. So it is part of a balanced approach, as we call it, not only between supply and demand reduction, which is also relevant for tobacco, but also within supply reduction. as it can be considered one of the 3 pillars of the international community's balanced approach towards drug control, in addition to crop eradication, so destroying the illicit crops, and interdiction efforts. Next slide, please. So this is the 6 decades of our experience. So that already shows that we have quite a lot of lessons learned, best practices, and an evolution of the concept of alternative development, which started in 1960 in Morocco, basically, and then has gone through various countries, Lebanon, Myanmar. But nowadays, we are looking at 3 geographical areas in the world, especially Southeast Asia, Latin America, and Central Asia, mostly Afghanistan. So today we have been speaking a lot about Africa. Africa is also of increased interest to alternative development in our sector, especially to find alternatives to cannabis cultivation. So what you see here, and don't worry about all the text here, but what you see is that eventually we started out as a crop substitution approach, so only focusing about changing one crop for another, and that eventually led to integrated rural development and eventually alternative development as we know it, so also tied to the Sustainable Development Goals. So I'm not exactly sure where the alternative livelihoods approaches that you are talking about in the toolkit are at the moment, but it seems that you have jumped ahead towards more or less the right side of this timeline to what alternative development is today. So a people-centered strategy focusing on economic and social development within a broader framework of sustainable rural development and environmental protection. So nevertheless, there might be some value for you in all the lessons learned and changes of strategies and tactics that we have gone through in the past 6 decades. Next slide, please. So as alternative development in our world is still a supply reduction strategy, mostly, I just wanted to touch upon some of the strategic elements that we're looking at, and these will probably all be relevant to you as well. So the first one is working with local and national authorities to make sure there is the political will and the financial commitment to support alternative development. So that has already today been mentioned by several speakers. Secondly, a key one is the economic dimension, of course. Alternative development is not charity, right? So it needs to produce crops and other products that can be sold at profitable prices to produce sustainable incomes. And this is for us a major challenge because the projects are often located in remote areas that lack basic infrastructure like roads to take crops and produce to markets. Thirdly, one way to improve the marketing conditions is to work together in cooperatives, farmer associations, and other community-based groups. So this was also already mentioned in your toolkit, so that there's overlap there. And fourthly, part of this community approach is the social aspects. So also in our case, people are really at the heart of these projects, and alternative development often uses an approach of helping people to help themselves. So it's all about local ownership, which again is also present in your toolkit. And lastly, as mentioned, there's increasingly an environmental strategy as well, which you really simply cannot ignore anymore. And some of the other speakers have also mentioned that already today. Next slide, please. So on the economic side, one of the major concerns is not only the competitive prices in themselves, but also the broader challenge of competing with the illicit crops like coca and opium poppy. So in our case, because they are illegal, they have a higher market value, which is something then that you have to compete with. And that is a primary reason why quality is so important. So to improve the quality and therefore the market access of alternative development products, in recent years, we have incorporated private sector partnerships. And the idea is to increase competitiveness and marketing potential by strengthening the economic, technological, and organizational components of projects through the value chain. So what you see here is one of our most successful projects, which is a private sector partnership with the French coffee roaster Malongo. And we have recently launched also a Colombian coffee to this. So this is really high-end marketing for products that are coming from alternative development projects. Next slide, please. So what is next for alternative development in our case? So we see the evolution of the concept continuing. First of all, there's new countries that are interested in alternative development. In Africa, there's Nigeria, for example, but there's also Brazil, Ecuador, and Mexico. Secondly, new livelihoods are added to the traditional mix of products and livelihoods. So you can think of ecotourism, or you can think of agroforestry with new forest-related products such as essential oils and medicine. Now, that might also be relevant to your context. And thirdly, the growing importance of climate change mitigation and environmental protection. We believe that it will offer complementary strategies for alternative development and alternative livelihoods. You could think about payments for environmental services, carbon credit schemes, sustainable agroforestry, or organic certification. So these are all not magical solutions, but at least they can help to add some complementary income to the projects. Next slide, please. So this is the guide that I've been working on with my colleagues at UNODC. And you see on the right side the 4 main themes that we have touched upon in the guide. And I think it actually might be very useful for your work as well, as it contains a lot of the environmental practices that are quite general, like composting, organic fertilizers, and pesticides. But also it looks into quite a number of approaches, such as regenerative agriculture or agroecology. A concept that has been also promoted a lot by our FAO colleagues. So that might be relevant for any kind of agricultural or agro-industry kind of projects. Next slide, please. So a bit more about the environment. So for us, the most important question was how to balance environmental protection with, at the same time, the need for profitable, sustainable livelihoods, knowing that also the alternative cultivation and production will have an environmental footprint. So here, I will not go into details, but you see a lot of different market-based strategies that you can use. And in each case, it's basically trying to create a win-win situation where you create some complementary income for the farmer, but at the same time, you also produce better environmental outcomes in general. So it's really trying to find out where these synergies are and where you can make the best of the situation, both in terms of economic sustainability and environmental sustainability. Next slide, please. And today, it's good to mention that this year is a special year for us. It's the 10th anniversary of the United Nations Guiding Principles on Alternative Development. And these principles were adopted in December 2013. And since then, they have been guiding member states on various dimensions of alternative development implementation, including a needs-based approach, including local ownership, evidence-based impact assessments, specific measures for women, children, and other high-risk populations, as well as the environmental protection measures that we already talked about. So I think this is an important policy document. It represents the consensus of member states, not only on what effective and sustainable interventions could look like on the ground, but also about the continued relevance of alternative development as a crucial instrument of supply reduction policies. So I've already seen some principles included also in your toolkit, but I think some of these principles that you find here might also be relevant for your context. And the next slide, please. So finally, it was really fascinating for me to go through the new toolkit, and I've just noted down some commonalities that I see with our work on alternative development. And as you see, there's a lot, and I think from the discussions today that we could easily add more to it. There's really a lot of overlap. Some of them are quite obvious, for example, the local ownership, etc. But some are also quite interesting, such as the link with deforestation. So in our case, illicit crop cultivation causes deforestation, but legal alternatives may also do so. So there's the need to really look into this. So in our discussions with member states, there is now also quite some anxiety about the impact of the new EU deforestation regulation. As this regulation covers many of the typical projects, the typical crops used in our case, for example, coffee, cocoa, and palm oil. So that might also be relevant when you are looking into alternatives, because everybody will at some point have to face, the regulation of the European Union, as this is such a powerful, attractive market for alternative crops and alternative products. So with that, thanks a lot for the attention. I'm happy to answer any questions, and UNODC in general, I think, is also very happy to assist you where relevant going forward at the project level, or perhaps at any kind of follow-up from the toolkit. Thanks a lot.
Thanks so much, Jort. That was really very fascinating. I learned a lot from that presentation. I didn't know much before about alternative development. Have learned a lot, and I see really it's quite clear how many points of intersection there are between the work that we're doing and the Article 17 toolkit and the work that UNODC has had underway since, in effect, the 1960s, according to the graph that you had on your slide. So really, really fascinating, and looking forward to hopefully sort of cementing that work forward in the future. Our next speaker this afternoon, at least this afternoon in Geneva, is a representative from the WHO FCTC Knowledge Hub, which is located in Brazil. It's the Knowledge Hub in respect of Articles 17 and 18, as you might guess. We're very happy to have with us today Ms. Raquel Gurgel, who will present for us elements of their work on the Article 17 and 18 elements of the Convention, as well as particular aspects and tools that they use that can help support parties in furthering their work. So thank you very much for being with us today, Raquel, and over to you.
Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. It's great to be here with you today. And I will discuss the implementation of Article 17 by parties. I will share some experiences from 2 countries. And I will talk about the role of our Knowledge Hub in disseminating knowledge and in supporting parties in their implementation efforts. Starting with the implementation of Article 17 by the parties, the 2021 Global Progress Report reveals that of all parties, 48% reported tobacco growing in their jurisdictions, but less than 1/3 of tobacco growing parties reported that they promote viable alternatives for tobacco growers. And in fact, that Article 17 is the least implemented article of the Framework Convention on Tobacco Control. And our analysis at the Knowledge Hub, based on the data that will be presented at the COP in Panama, shows that this situation has not changed. But as my colleagues have already pointed out, there are some very interesting experiences going on, and I will comment on 2 others in addition to those that have been mentioned here. And the first one is in Colombia. Colombia is a very interesting example of how tobacco growers are in a vulnerable situation. In 2019, Cole Tobacco, a subsidiary of Philip Morris International, discontinued cigarette production in the country and stopped purchasing tobacco leaves from the country as well. So as a result, 12,000 tobacco producing families were harmed. And some of them received very small compensation from the company, but these families were left without any perspective of what to do. So the Colombian government had to intervene, and the Ministry of Agriculture reached out to the FAO to integrate former tobacco farmers in the project Plus Cotton. This project is a South-South cooperation involving the Brazilian Cooperation Agency of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, the FAO, and the Colombian federal government. This initiative also operates in other countries, always in collaboration with the respective governments. And Alejandro Polo, an FAO technician involved in this project, shared with us during a webinar hosted by our Knowledge Hub some of the key strengths of the project Plus Cotton in transitioning from tobacco to cotton crops. First, there is a ready market for cotton, as Colombia consumes a significant amount of cotton and does not produce enough of it. As we know, cotton is not food, just like tobacco, but farmers received assistance in transitioning to agroecological practices to reduce pesticide use and also to plant cotton in combination with crops like corn, beans, and sesame to ensure food security. And in Brazil, we also have an interesting situation because there is a national program for the diversification. Brazil is the third largest tobacco producer in the world, with nearly 140,000 families engaged in tobacco cultivation. And the ratification of the convention in Brazil was predicated on the creation of a program to promote alternatives for tobacco farmers. And this requirement was set during the ratification process in the National Congress. So in 2006, shortly after Brazil ratified the treaty, the National Program for Diversification in Tobacco Growing Areas was established under the Ministry of Agrarian Development's responsibility. The program was based on technical assistance and rural extension projects. And from 2006 to 2010, 30,000 families were benefited. And from 2010 to 2016, an additional 21,000 families were supported. But the program has been paralyzed since 2019 with no actions taken. This program had several limitations, and the main one is the discontinuity of services. There were interruptions, especially from 2016 on, due to a lack of funding. And from 2019 on, it's been completely paralyzed. Another issue is the small size of farmers' properties. The assessment in Brazil is that it's not easy to get profit from food crops in very, very small farms. And the problem is that most tobacco farmers live in small areas. So this doesn't incentivize farmers to switch to alternatives. And so having access to land is really important too. And also there was a lack of coordination between the program and other public policies and programs, such as those related to getting credit for the production or those related to the distribution of agricultural products, because it's no use for a farmer to grow food if they don't have the means to sell their products. And this is a problem that we see in tobacco growing regions in Brazil. So now I would talk a bit about our knowledge hub. We are based in Brazil at the Oswaldo Cruz Foundation, which is a Brazilian public research institute affiliated with the Ministry of Health. The foundation promotes health and social development, generates and disseminates scientific and technological knowledge, and engages in cooperation and exchanges with institutions and agencies in over 50 countries. Within the Oswaldo Cruz Foundation, we have the Center for Studies on Tobacco and Health, CETAB, which is housed in the Sergio Aroca National Public Health School, and its mission is to collaborate in the implementation of the WHO FCTC and in public policies to reduce exposures to risk factors for NCDs. And finally, our Knowledge Hub, the Knowledge Hub for Article 17 and 18, was established within CETAB in 2020, and we develop, analyze, synthesize, and disseminate knowledge related to these articles. And we work to support the Convention Secretariat in facilitating cooperation between parties and providing assistance in the implementation of both articles. Regarding the dissemination of information and knowledge, we have carried out various activities, including 2 virtual campaigns. One was launched last year, and the other one this year, which was focused on Article 17, The World Needs Food, Not Tobacco. It was launched in May, along with the World No Tobacco Day. Both campaigns are available in 8 languages: English, Spanish, French, Russian, Arabic, Chinese, Portuguese, and Hindi, and they include various promotional materials that can be downloaded and shared on social networks by anyone. We also host webinars on Article 17 and 18. We have a podcast. We just completed the 2nd season of the podcast, which focuses on Article 17, and it's called Tobacco Farming Mythbusters. We are also producing fact sheets on Article 17 and 18, and right now we have finished our first fact sheets focused on Brazilian situation, and we plan to produce fact sheets related to other countries, primarily tobacco-producing countries, starting next year. So it would be very important to work in collaboration with these countries for that. We have also recently launched the monthly newsletter to keep readers informed about the latest research and the latest news related to alternatives for tobacco growers and the environmental and health impacts caused by tobacco growing. We also have an image bank with pictures of tobacco cultivation and alternative livelihoods. And of course, all images are protected with watermarks to prevent organizations linked to the tobacco industry from downloading them, but they can be requested via email. And of course, we have our social media. We're pretty active on Instagram and Twitter and also on Facebook. And in terms of assistance to parties, we are open to providing support through research, capacity building, organizing courses and webinars, and other activities. And it's important to note that interested parties should contact the Secretariat for the Secretariat to facilitate this collaboration. Thank you very much. This is my contact information, and you can access our website and social media and podcasts and all our materials through this QR code. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Raquel. Very interesting overview of all of the work that you've been doing at the Knowledge Hub in Brazil and the Knowledge Hub for Articles 17 and 18. So I note with some unhappiness that we have only 3 minutes left in today's session, but that doesn't mean that we have not already been answering your questions. So you will note, those of you who are still with us, that we have responded, our speakers have responded to the questions that have been raised in the Q&A section. And you'll see that there are some interesting links in that Q&A section and also in the chat section that give you more information on the environmental impact of tobacco cultivation. And lest you think we are concluding the discussion here, I wish to tell you that you are in luck, because we have at the upcoming 10th session of our meeting of the governing bodies, that is the Conference of the Parties, which will take place later this month in Panama, we will be having a side event on this very issue. And in fact, this side event is being sponsored by the Knowledge Hub on Articles 17 and 18 and by 2 parties to the Framework Convention, and that is Brazil and Thailand. So that will take place on Wednesday, the 22nd of November at 1:30 local time in Panama. So we do hope that those of you who are with us in Panama are able to join us. And certainly there will be more information and more discussion of these issues at the 10th session of the COP. So unfortunately, we are having to draw our meeting today to a close. And I just wish to thank you all very, very much for taking time out of your very busy schedules to join us, to listen in to the webinar, to ask questions, and particularly special thanks to our speakers today for their really impressive presentations, very interesting, engaging information. And really, I found it very inspiring as well and motivating, I think, for a lot of our people engaging with us today to think about ways that they can expand their implementation of Article 17 and how to do it more effectively, given certain trails that have already been blazed in this area. So thank you so much to our esteemed speakers for joining us today. I'd also like to thank our colleagues, our Convention Secretariat colleagues who are working very hard behind the scenes to make sure that everything runs smoothly today. And I think you can agree with me, things have gone very smoothly. So thank you so much. And in particular to our IT colleagues and to our interpreters for your incredible support. In case you would like to review certain aspects of this webinar, it will be available in the multiple languages on our YouTube channel. So we invite you to have another look at it if you wish, or to share that link, which will be sent to you shortly with colleagues you think who might be interested in the content. However, for now, I see that it is 2:29 p.m. and I thank you all very much for joining us today. And again, to our speakers, thank you very much and wish you all a fantastic rest of the day.